Things have changed enormously since I was an undergraduate, and I think some of these changes are part of the problem we're faced with. There's been a huge shift from assessment that's designed to support learning to assessment that's designed to produce marks. The number of marks that contribute to a degree programme is hugely more than it used to be, and the number of times students do a piece of work just for learning, just for feedback, has declined to the point where in some of the programmes you've looked at, it's zero or effectively zero. Now, that wasn't my experience as an undergraduate. This matters because, as we'll see, feedback is one of the most important indicators of educational gain. So something about feedback that happens with formative assessment is changing dramatically. Interestingly, at Oxford, I mean, I'm not suggesting you do what Oxford does, but at Oxford, formative to summative is about 10 to 1. In the example here, it's 1 to 10. That's a huge difference. On the National Student Survey, the ratings that are worst by a huge margin are those for assessment and especially for feedback. The differences between institutions on what students rate about feedback are so huge that on their own they predict most of the overall ranking of institutions. Lots of the things on the National Student Survey, the differences between institutions are quite small, but the differences on feedback are enormous, so that on its own produces much of the variance. So if you can do something about your feedback scores, you jump up the league tables once you add these things up. Oxford, curiously, still has extraordinarily limited variety of summative assessment, or in many programmes, assessment of any kind. So that in most of the humanities, students write essays, then they write more essays, then they write big essays, and then they have exams with essays in, and that's it. They don't do anything except essays. We've encountered programmes where there are 30 different kinds of things that students do that contribute to their degree programme. This is a radically different notion of what's an appropriate thing to do. Should it be 1 or should it be 30 or somewhere in between the two? Another thing that's changed is the extent to which I think students are strategic. I interviewed a lot of students nowadays. Other people do the interviewing for me, which is nice. But I used to interview a lot of students in my research about student learning. And I'd be sitting there with a student, and an opening social gambit would be, "Hi, thanks for being here, how's it going?" And they would say 58.24. And what they meant was that's their average mark this week on their degree programme, and they know that they've got 1.6% to make up, and then they'll get a 2-1. And they can tell you what they would need to do to get that 1.6% to get to 2-1. They'll tell you which modules they're going to take because they've got higher average marks. They'll tell you their tactics for doing it. They are so cute about this. Now, I don't remember behaving strategically to that extent as an undergraduate. It's the degree classification is your meal ticket for life, because if you go and get a 2-1, you're really at the bottom of the queue for job applications and things like that. So it seems to matter much more to students than it did. Their time is under huge pressure, so they use their time very strategically in what they do and what they don't do. And I think that's changed. Now, I've been in other educational contexts where students don't behave strategically like that. It's quite uncommon in some Dutch universities to behave strategically. They make choices, but not for that reason. We've obviously got huge resource constraints. We've got much less time to do the things that teachers used to do. But despite that, nowadays teachers are doing more assessment, far more of it. There's far more things that are marked than used to be. And that's odd, given that the resources are lower. Compared with North America and the Far East, there's been a very modest increase in use of computers to replace teachers in marking. So multiple choice question testing is enormous in the States. I'm working with an international team writing materials for new teachers in higher education. And the American authors are full of stuff about testing and quizzes. We don't do that here. So that we, by and large, kept hold of the open-ended, complex tasks that students need to study around and write up and require interpretive responses from teachers. And we've kept to that despite the difficulty of doing so, which is quite interesting. The other thing that's changed, there are now really big differences between universities in the way people do assessment. Really big differences, and they didn't used to be. So that's my take on things spreading out and become different. That helps to make sense of some of the things that are going on. Okay, I'm going to just show you some quotes of students talking about their experience of assessment, and then I'm going to ask you to think with each other about if I came onto this campus and sat down with a cup of coffee with one of your students, what would they tell me about their experience of your assessment? So these are just some prompts to help you think about it. Some of this comes from quite a long time ago. This comes from MIT, top technology university in the world.